Pol Pot was a big fan of communism. Pol Pot didn't just read the Communist Manifesto, he treated it as a guidebook for his future project. Remember when Marx said that we should abolish private property and currency as steps toward communism? Well, as soon as Pol Pot seized power in 1975 and became the dictator of Kampuchea, he literally blew up the National Bank of Cambodia. And this is just one example out of many that displays Pol Pot's willingness to do anything to stay consistent with Marxist vision. Today, we will look at Pol Pot, who, unlike Stalin and Lenin, did his best to implement Marxist policies, but ended up causing millions of deaths and unnecessary suffering in pursuit of his utopia. You may ask me what made Pol Pot such an exemplary Marxist. Lots of things. For starters, Year Zero policy. Marx explicitly stated that for a new revolutionary society to emerge, the old capitalistic society must be destroyed first. Pol Pot believed this to be true, so he developed his ideology called Year Zero, that served as a blueprint that made all of his crimes against humanity later permissible. He advocated for a total destruction of culture, traditions, and institutions, arguing that it was nothing but a pile of decaying flesh on the wagon of revolution. As a result, thousands of people executed, temples desecrated, and religious practice in any shape or form became punishable by death. Pol Pot wanted to make sure nothing was left of Cambodia that would remind people of what it used to be before the mad dictator took over. Abolishing money meant that the entire economy had to run on direct state distribution. The state would provide food, tools, and necessities in exchange for labor. No wages, no markets, no transactions, pure Marxist dreamland. But, and there is always a but, there was a problem. The state had no functional mechanism to actually distribute anything efficiently. At the end of the day, the ruling party wasn't even a party in the strict sense. It was a guerrilla movement that had just taken the power. They had no infrastructure, no logistics, no expertise, no competence whatsoever. So the sweet dreams of moneyless distribution crashed into cold wall of reality. As a result, total chaos. Swarms of people whose skill sets were meant for a money economy found themselves jobless and their knowledge and savings worthless. They were forced at gunpoint from cities into agricultural communes that they had no training for, and regardless of how hard they worked, they remained class enemies. The result was horrible but expected. Mass starvation. People were eating leaves off trees and rice seeds, the very rice seeds needed for next year's harvest, which created compounding cycle of depletion year after year. While common Cambodians starved, local Khmer Rouge cadres ate plenty of food and even had their own personal chef. But Pol Pot wasn't done yet. He needed to destroy people not only physically, but socially too. And that's why he went after the entire concept of family. The family, you see, is inconvenient for a totalitarian state. It creates loyalty that competes with loyalty to the regime. A man who loves his wife and children will protect them before he protects the revolution. Pol Pot understood this perfectly, so the family had to go. The Khmer Rouge forced Cambodians to live communally with strangers rather than their own relatives. Children were separated from parents and conscripted into mobile labor brigades, essentially child soldiers of the revolution, trained to report on their own families for counter-revolutionary behavior. Think about it for a second. Pol Pot's regime's most brightest achievement is turning children into surveillance tools against their own parents. This is literally 1984 by George Orwell. And it worked. Not because Cambodians found this lifestyle suitable for living, but because starvation and fear are very persuasive. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is Pol Pot, the cause of quarter of Cambodia dead in 4 years, a civilization stripped to its bones, families torn apart, children turned into informants, intellectuals executed, monks beaten, temples desecrated, dead economy, all in faithful service to an ideology that promised liberation and delivered a graveyard. The tragedy of Cambodia is not that Pol Pot was a monster who hijacked a noble idea. The tragedy is that he was a true believer who followed the idea to its logical conclusion. It is important to remember that Pol Pot wasn't a poor man lacking education. He came from a prosperous farming family and was educated at some of Cambodia's most elite schools. It made him exactly the wrong person to speak for the working class, people who primarily came from poorer backgrounds. He was a man who came from privilege and remained privileged his entire life. He was supposed to receive his higher education in Paris, but instead he spent all of his time on the French Communist Party. This resulted in failed exams and him never receiving a qualification. The man who would restructure an entire society's education system couldn't pass his own exams. What an irony. And this irony is persistent in most of the communist leaders of the 20th century. It is either the type of Stalin, the type who came from nothing and saw revolution as the fastest elevator up, who had no other choice other than opposing the established regime in hopes of securing better conditions. Or it is a man who comes from privilege, like Lenin, but nevertheless exploits the sweet slogans about oppression of the working class even though he never was the part of the working class. These people desperately try to enforce changes that take decades to implement in a short period of time, believing that radical shift will bring the results. But the history shows that radical shift without foundation doesn't build a new world. It just burns down the old one. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this video. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.